For my first impressions video, I figured that I would talk about the anime that I was enjoying the most this season. So for my second first impressions, I figured that it would only be for the best to talk about the anime that I'm enjoying the least this season. Before I really get started, I want to bring up two caveats. The first caveat is if you end up watching my content long enough, I'm sure that you'll probably learn that I like almost all anime. And I don't just mean genres, although I do particularly dislike mecha if I had to choose one. But if it's an anime, I'm probably going to enjoy it. It has to end up being really, really bad if I'm going to want to drop the anime by the end of the season, or before it actually finishes. Which I actually haven't dropped a single anime which I've started this season. Which leads me into the second caveat of I haven't watched every anime this season. Since I don't typically drop shows, I can't really afford to watch over 30 shows in a single season. So I'm currently watching 15 series that started this season, and out of all of them, this one's at the bottom of my list. Now, I'm sure there's probably one or two that's worse out of these, but I figure that I've got a good enough sample size out of all of the shows I'm watching to still consider this the worst of the season, at least in my book. So with that out of the way, I'd like to talk about my personal pick for the worst of the season, In Another World with My Smartphone. Now, the reason why I feel the way I do about In Another World with my smartphone is because of two main reasons. Its writing and its pacing. Both of these have had a particularly hard time since the show has began, particularly the writing in the first couple of episodes, and the pacing, honestly, all throughout. The first episode really fails to do literally anything to set it out from a normal isekai show. Well, it basically just feels like they followed the book to the letter and tried absolutely nothing to draw the viewer in. It starts out already with the main character talking to God, and God being like, "Oh, I'm sorry I dropped lightning on you. Better send you to another world to apologize." And like, even just inside those first few minutes, I felt like the show was really skipping on some comedy that would have been really good there, to at least like draw you into the show a bit more. Like, it wasn't the usual you got hit by a car, like they treated it like if it was every everyday thing, but like, he dropped lightning on him. Why would you not show that? Like, I can just picture him just walking along on his daily routine, maybe playing on his smartphone, and like, wow, my life is going so great. I can't wait for such and such to happen, or like, I'm going to talk to this girl for the first time, and then bam, lightning strikes, and he's in heaven now. Or like, it starts out like the normal show where there's a car coming and maybe someone's going to be hit by the truck or car or whatever. He pushes them out of the way, but is actually smart enough to jump out of the way himself, and he's like, wow, that was a close one. And then bam, lightning. Like, I feel like it passed up a really easy opportunity to just draw you in with something unexpected. Like, I want to say comedy, but usually someone being struck by lightning and dying wouldn't be comedic, but like, you immediately follow his perspective, so it would probably be fine. And like, as soon as God brings him back, he sees that God put himself in his contacts and is the only person who he could probably call with his smartphone. And I feel like they also missed an opportunity for him to rename God in his contacts. Like, he could have easily done something like, the idiot who killed me. So every time that he gets a call from him, that's the name that pops up. And I just feel like that would have been the best way to take it. And after all of that, like, the show just doesn't do anything. Like, it really wants to set off the plot, but it does absolutely nothing to draw you into the show. And it moves at like a really, really fast pace while doing so. You immediately meet the next two girls. They entirely skip telling you that God gave him other powers just because he felt like it, which is a part of the reason why I feel that the writing is such an issue, is because they really made the main character so overpowered for absolutely no reason besides just feeling like making him overpowered. They're like, oh yeah, you now have physical combat because yes, which is kind of fine, but then they're like, oh, and those 6 different kinds of magic that everyone can only do so many of. Oh, but you can do them all and you're also ridiculously powerful in them. Oh, and you have all of the special magic as well, which most people only probably know a few. And they're special to each particular person, but you know them all because, of course, you do. And then the second episode was actually worse than the first. Because while the first episode was boring, the second episode was, well, bad. It's just plot device after plot device after plot device. Well, okay, it's really bad pacing with bad plot devices. First you meet the samurai girl who, like, the characters seem okay, but she just gets thrown into the group, and then immediately they, like, run into a carriage being attacked by bandits. They take them out. He uses Slip, or Trip, I think it was Slip, to defeat them all, which was the spell which he had just learned. And, like, he defeated Lizardmen by making the ground below them frictionless and making them slip. And then I saw that there was the wizard, and I'm like, oh, how will he beat the stationary wizard? Slip! And it's like, okay, so he knocked him over, now what's he gonna do? And then they like, okay, the bandits are taken care of, let's move on with the plot. And it's like, oh, okay. And like, he had just learned that, and then he had also just learned short-range teleportation, which he used to save the guy who was shot with the arrow. So like, he learned both of these like less than 60 seconds before this fighting started. Now, I'll admit, taking out a piece of an arrow lodged in someone with a short-range teleportation spell was a little bit unique. That's the one thing I'll give the second episode. And then they go to the king's manor, he thanks them, and then he's like, oh, by the way, my wife is blind, and I really wish I had a healer who could learn the spell, who could save her. Man, this is such a shame. And then all of the girls look at him expectantly, and it's like, where's the tension? Like, yes, we already know that he's broken. So yes, he can learn the spell that is conveniently needed that the guy has, but like, no one can use it. So like, then he saves her, and then it's like, oh, yay, we all love you. And like, it just seemed to go out of its way to make the main character look as broken as it could for no reason. And it felt very forced and had no real point to it besides to make him look better. And just, to be honest, it's the worst episode of anime I've seen this season. And since I'm watching 15 shows, that's over 75 episodes of anime because I'm really late on doing these first impressions. Let's be honest here. And the worst part is, both of these episodes didn't really have much to make up for them. The two things I want to give some credit for inside those episodes was not making the use of the smartphone extremely cringeworthy, which is what I was expecting to happen with a title like In Another World of My Smartphone. He just kind of used it when he felt like it, and it felt like a very natural inclusion, considering it's the only particularly new thing added inside the series. And the characters are okay. I mentioned that before. There was nothing innately wrong with the characters, aside from the main character because he's just innately broken. But like, the other girls are fairly stereotypical. There's nothing too much sticking out about them, but they're not that bad either. Now, if you'll notice, I only talked about the first two characters so far. And this first impression is about the first 6 episodes. And that's because after the first 2 episodes, the show honestly gets better. And that kind of disappoints me, if I'm being honest. Whenever I was only 2 episodes in, I already knew that I would be doing these first impressions and reviewing a lot of anime this season. And while I was considering dropping the show after those first 2 episodes, I figured that I would be continuing because I wanted a show that I could talk about how bad it is, just to kind of show a show that I disliked. Because, like I mentioned before, it's fairly rare for me to dislike a show. And then, what do you know it, the show actually starts getting better. Now, it's not good. Well, okay, it's not great, definitely. But, like, it definitely improved its writing after the first 2 episodes. The pacing is still pretty bad. But, like, with the 3rd and 4th episode, they actually show the first combat. And the plot devices don't feel as forced, but they're still kind of there. And the character interactions get better. The smartphone usage actually gets worse as they go on. And if I'm being honest, the 5th and 6th episode I think were actually quite good. Especially compared to the ones before them. Like, the 5th episode had the Slime Mansion, which was really the first heavy dose of comedy that was included in the series. And after they botched the plot so hard at the start, I feel like comedy was the best way that the show could actually move forward and not just feel worse. And it felt like it was avoiding comedy, like at least any real attempts at comedy. And that was its best showing so far on that front. And the 6th episode actually, I felt like, was good in pacing, good in moving forward with the story. Had its first really good combat, which was with the dragon. At least, once again, compared to anything else with the series, it was basically the second combat that happened in the show. And what surprised me the most is that now the progression of the show actually feels somewhat natural. Now that they've gotten through all of the plot devices, it felt like it needed to get to this point. It feels like they're no longer having to go out of the way to force things to happen. Like, all of the girls being in love with him kind of makes sense whenever you're the strongest person on the planet and kind of a nice guy. And also I'm kind of feeling like the coaches are different enough, well, him being kind of nice to them. As they point out inside the 6th episode, he's very misleading towards them. And I didn't really feel that like that at first. But then I thought about it, that he's buying them gifts and like is allowing them to live inside his house and all. And to them, this is his mansion, to be fair. It's not just a normal house. And to be fair to them, that's probably a lot more forward than he's used to. Now, I'm not going to defend the helm that heavily. It still got started extremely forced. But I feel like the way that all of them just are getting angry at him now, that he's being nice to them. And, like, not so much in a tsundere way, but more in a, why don't you notice that we like you sort of way, because you're an idiot and you're way too nice and it's odd sort of way. And I also feel like it makes sense how the king's treating him now. Like, it was really forced how they met the king. It was really forced how he first helped the king. But, like, after that, the king has very heavy incentive to be extremely nice to Toya. I remember his name now. At first he's like, hey, I randomly saw you, can you help me and like heal my brother? And, like, he does that too, and he's like, hey, how about I knight you? And then, like, knowing that he's going to refuse that, he gives him a mansion. And then, like, it seems like a day later he comes by and is like, hey, do you mind traveling across the country for me? And, like, it really makes sense why a king would want someone with absolutely no allegiances and all the powers of the universe at his fingertips to like him. And, like, he's basically bribing the main character to be his right-hand man. And he doesn't seem to realize it. And I'm not really thinking the king's going to end up being a bad guy, nor am I really asking for it. But I'm really wanting the show to not feel like everyone loves him just because everyone's a nice guy. And people actually realize, hey, we should be nice to this guy because he's the most powerful guy on the planet. Because, like, the show's already bothered forcing him to be that character. Like, they might as well roll with it. Now, once again, I'm not really saying that I'm loving the show now, or that I feel like it's going in a great direction, but it's definitely better than what it was doing. I think that moving forward, I'll probably still end up liking the series. I'm definitely going to finish it. Once again, I don't stop series easily. And for better or for worse, I feel like it's best if I finish it and just see where it ends up going. It's still, despite me liking it better, it's still definitely my least favorite of all of the shows I'm watching this season. But it's not awful. If you like isekai shows and don't mind blatant plot devices and extremely overpowered main characters for no real reason, then you'll probably end up liking the show. Otherwise, it's probably best to skip it. That's really all I have to say on it. It's okay now. I hope it doesn't go down another terrible rabbit hole again, but it might. And if it does, then I'll probably be here to talk about it again. Even if it doesn't, I probably will. But I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a good day. Peace.